The first time they found him, the glacial ice had turned his skin to leather. His face, dark and weathered like an old baseball glove, peered out from beneath 5,300 years of alpine frost, a relic of the Copper Age accidentally preserved by the same unforgiving elements that had claimed his life. When hikers Helmut and Erika Simon stumbled upon the protruding body in 1991, they assumed they had discovered just another unfortunate mountaineer, perhaps a lost German, Austrian, or Italian who had fallen victim to the harsh conditions of the Ötztal Alps. They were wrong. They were more wrong than they could possibly imagine. The body they found that September day would become known as Ötzi the Iceman, a name derived from the Ötztal Valley near where he was discovered. For 3 decades, he represented our most perfectly preserved window into European prehistory. His stomach contents revealed his last meals. His tattoos suggested ancient medicinal practices. His copper axe hinted at metalworking knowledge. The arrow wound in his shoulder told us how he died. And his DNA told us he was one of us, a European, an ancestor. Until now, a new analysis of Ötzi's genome, conducted with technology that did not exist when his body was first examined, has revealed something that has shaken the foundations of archaeology, anthropology, and our understanding of human evolution. The results were so unexpected that Dr. Bryce Zimmerman, lead geneticist on the project, initially refused to publish them. "We ran the tests 17 times, he says, his voice still carrying traces of disbelief months later. Each time, the results came back the same. There was no contamination, no methodological error. The conclusion was inescapable, yet impossible to accept. The impossible conclusion. Ötzi the Iceman, the mummified human we had studied for decades, whose genome we thought we understood, carried genetic markers that do not match any known human lineage. Not modern humans. Not Neanderthals. Not Denisovans. Ötzi was not one of us. Not entirely. And that changes everything." The South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, houses Ötzi in a climate-controlled chamber maintained at exactly 21.2 degrees Fahrenheit -6 degrees Celsius with 98% humidity, conditions meticulously designed to mimic the glacial environment that preserved him for over 5 millennia. Dr. Meredith Peterson, the museum's American-born director of research, gestures toward the viewing window where visitors line up daily to catch a glimpse of the mummy. "When I first started working with Ötzi 15 years ago, we thought we knew who he was," she explains, adjusting her glasses. "A European hunter, possibly a shepherd, who lived approximately 3,300 BCE. His genetic markers suggested close ties to present-day Sardinians and inhabitants of the Italian Alps. We had essentially written him into our human family tree as a direct European ancestor. The museum itself stands as a testament to that understanding. Exhibits trace Ötzi's presumed cultural connections to other Copper Age findings across Europe. Dioramas show him dressed in animal hides, wielding his yew-bow and copper axe, tools that perfectly matched our understanding of technological development during that period. But science does not stand still. In 2010 and 2012, researchers sequenced Ötzi's genome using the most advanced technology available at the time. Those results confirmed what everyone expected. Ötzi was genetically similar to modern Europeans, particularly those from isolated Alpine communities. "We should have paid more attention to the anomalies in those early genomic studies," says Dr. Peterson. "There were unexplained segments, genetic markers that didn't quite align with known human patterns. But science is conservative by nature. When faced with unexplained data, we tend to attribute it to contamination or sequencing errors rather than paradigm-shifting discoveries. That changed in late 2022, when Dr. Bryce Zimmerman and his team at the Cambridge Institute for Paleogenetics requested permission to re-examine Ötzi's DNA using newly developed extraction and sequencing techniques. These methods, first pioneered to study highly degraded DNA from sites in Siberia and the Middle East, offered unprecedented accuracy and depth of analysis. The older techniques were like reading a book with many pages torn out and others smudged with water damage, explains Zimmerman. You could get the general story, but you might miss crucial details. Our new approach is more like restoring the entire text, character by character, even when the original has deteriorated significantly. The South Tyrol Museum granted access, though not without hesitation. Each new tissue sample potentially damages the precious remains. But the promise of new insights was too compelling to ignore. The research team collected 16 micron-sized samples, each smaller than a grain of salt, from various parts of Ötzi's body. What followed was 18 months of the most comprehensive genetic analysis ever performed on ancient human remains. As the first results came in, confusion spread through Zimmermann's lab. Junior researchers assumed they had contaminated the samples. Equipment was recalibrated. Protocols were reviewed. New samples were processed. The results remained consistent, and consistently puzzling. I remember the exact moment when we realized what we were looking at, recounts Dr. Emily Thornton, a postdoctoral researcher on Zimmermann's team. We were comparing Ötzi's genome against a database containing DNA from thousands of modern humans, ancient human remains, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. The computer kept returning the same error message. No significant match found. At first, they thought it was a software bug. Then they examined the raw data manually. Approximately 97% of Ötzi's genome aligns with Homo sapiens, Zimmermann explains, particularly ancient European populations. But there's a crucial 3% that doesn't match anything in our comparative databases. Not modern humans from any population. Not Neanderthals. Not Denisovans. Not even the more recently discovered human species like Homo luzonensis or the mysterious Denisovan-like populations from Asia. That 3% represents approximately 90 million base pairs of DNA, a significant portion of the genome containing hundreds of functional genes. And these weren't just random mutations or degraded sections. These sequences show all the hallmarks of functional, selected genetic material. Zimmermann continues. They include intact coding regions, regulatory elements, and what appear to be adaptations to specific environmental pressures. Whatever this DNA is, it was functional and provided some evolutionary advantage. The implications were so extraordinary that the research team imposed an information blackout while they verified their findings. For 6 months, they repeated analyses, invited external experts to review their methodology, and explored every possible alternative explanation. None emerged. By early 2024, they had no choice but to present their findings to the scientific community. Ötzi the Iceman carried genetic material from an unknown hominin species, one that had somehow interbred with the human lineage that would eventually give rise to modern Europeans. We had been housing, studying, and exhibiting a human hybrid, and not a hybrid of any known human species. The question was no longer who Ötzi was, but what he was and what that meant for our understanding of human evolution. The announcement of the Zimmermann team's findings in February 2024 immediately triggered both excitement and skepticism throughout the scientific community. Initial reactions ranged from outright dismissal to cautious interest, with many prominent anthropologists suggesting that contamination or methodological errors must be responsible for such extraordinary claims. Dr. Thomas Reynolds of Harvard's Department of Human Evolutionary Biology was among the most vocal critics. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, he stated in a widely circulated response. The idea that a previously unknown hominin species existed in Europe as recently as 5,300 years ago, and somehow escaped detection in both the fossil and genetic record, is simply not credible without far more substantial proof. This skepticism was understandable. The standard narrative of European prehistory had been well established. Anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived in Europe approximately 45,000 years ago, eventually replacing the Neanderthals who had inhabited the continent for hundreds of thousands of years. While genomic studies had revealed that modern non-African humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA from ancient interbreeding events, these hybridizations were thought to have occurred over 40,000 years ago, not a mere 5,300 years ago when Ötzi lived. The timeline simply did not make sense within the existing framework of human evolution. To address these criticisms, Zimmermann's team took the unprecedented step of making their entire dataset and methodological protocols publicly available for peer review. They also distributed sample materials to 5 independent laboratories around the world for verification. We understood the skepticism, Zimmermann explains. If I were reviewing these findings rather than producing them, I would have been equally dubious. That's why we committed to complete transparency from the beginning. The verification process took months, during which the scientific community remained divided. But as the independent analyses were completed, consensus began to emerge. The Cambridge team's findings were methodologically sound. The unknown genetic material in Ötzi's genome was real, not the result of contamination or analytical errors. This consensus led to the next phase of the investigation, determining the nature and origin of the unknown DNA sequences. Dr. Meredith Peterson's team at the South Tyrol Museum began comparing the mysterious genetic markers with every available ancient DNA sample in scientific databases worldwide. Meanwhile, Dr. Zimmerman focused on functional analysis, attempting to determine what these genes actually did and what selective advantages they might have provided. We identified several intriguing patterns, Peterson explains. The unknown sequences include genes associated with high-altitude adaptation, cold tolerance, and ultraviolet radiation resistance. There are also several genes linked to immune function that appear highly adapted to specific pathogens that would have been common in prehistoric alpine environments. These functional analyses provided the first clues about the nature of the mysterious hominin species that had contributed to Ötzi's genome. Whatever this species was, it appears to have been exceptionally well adapted to the harsh alpine environment, more so than the modern humans who arrived in Europe from Africa via the Middle East. The discovery also raised a disturbing question. If these genetic adaptations were so advantageous for life in the Alps, why didn't they persist more broadly in modern European populations? Dr. Sofia Antonelli, an evolutionary biologist from the University of Milan who joined the research effort, proposed a compelling theory. Natural selection isn't just about survival advantages, she explains. It's about reproductive success. It's entirely possible that these hybrid individuals, while well adapted to specific environmental niches, experienced reduced fertility or other reproductive disadvantages that limited the spread of these genetic variants. This theory gained support when Zimmerman's team identified several genes in the unknown sequences that impact reproductive processes. Some of these genes, when expressed in certain combinations with standard human genes, could potentially reduce fertility, a common phenomenon in hybrid species throughout the animal kingdom. We may be looking at a classic evolutionary trade-off, Antonelli suggests. These hybrids gained environmental adaptations but paid for them with reduced reproductive capacity. Over generations, the frequency of these genetic variants would naturally decline, even if they provided significant survival advantages for individuals who carried them. As these analyses progressed, a new question emerged. Was Ötzi unique, or were there others like him? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Benjamin Zhao, a population geneticist at Stanford University, had been working on an independent project analyzing genetic data from isolated alpine communities in northern Italy, Austria, and Switzerland. His study, initially designed to track the persistence of ancient genetic lineages in geographically isolated populations, took on new significance in light of the Ötzi revelations. We were looking for something completely different, Zhao recalls. Our focus was on genetic markers linked to lactose tolerance and other adaptations associated with the transition to agricultural lifestyles. But after the Ötzi announcement, we reanalyzed our data specifically looking for these newly identified unknown sequences. The results were stunning. Traces of the mysterious genetic markers, always representing less than 0.5% of the genome, appeared in approximately 8% of individuals from the most isolated alpine communities. The frequency was highest in populations that had remained geographically isolated throughout recorded history. This changes the timeline completely, Zhao explains. We're not talking about a hybridization event that occurred and then disappeared tens of thousands of years ago. These genetic exchanges were ongoing in European populations much more recently than anyone had imagined, and traces of them persist in certain populations even today. The combined findings from the Cambridge, South Tyrol, and Stanford teams pointed toward an inescapable conclusion. A previously unknown hominin species had coexisted alongside Homo sapiens in the European Alps until at least the Copper Age, occasionally interbreeding and producing hybrid offspring like Ötzi. But the most profound questions remained unanswered. Who were these mysterious hominins? Where did they come from? and why had they remained undetected in both the fossil and historical record until now? The search for answers led researchers to revisit archaeological sites across the Alpine region. If a non-human hominin species had survived in Europe until 5,300 years ago, there should be physical evidence, bones, tools, dwellings, or other artifacts that did not fit neatly into the established narrative of human development. Dr. Marcus Berger, an archaeologist from the University of Innsbruck who specializes in Alpine prehistory, began compiling a database of anomalous findings, archaeological discoveries that had been documented but remained unexplained or had been attributed to ritual behavior, cultural outliers, or simple misidentification. When you examine the archaeological record with this new possibility in mind, patterns begin to emerge, Berger explains. For decades, we've been finding artifacts and remains that didn't quite fit our understanding, but we lacked a framework to interpret them correctly. One of the most significant cases involved skeletal remains discovered in 1987 in a remote cave in the Dolomites, approximately 80 kilometers east of where Ötzi was found. The partial skeleton, consisting of a skull fragment, several vertebrae, and a nearly complete pelvis, had unusual proportions that didn't match typical human anatomy. At the time, researchers attributed these anomalies to pathological conditions, perhaps a developmental disorder or disease that affected bone growth. With permission from Italian authorities, Berger's team extracted DNA from the remains and compared it to both modern humans and the unknown sequences found in Ötzi. The results confirmed their suspicions. The skeletal remains contained a much higher percentage, approximately 83%, of the mysterious non-human DNA. This individual represents the opposite situation from Ötzi, Berger notes. Where Ötzi was predominantly human with some unknown hominin ancestry, this individual was predominantly from this unknown species with some human admixture. We're seeing evidence of ongoing genetic exchange between two distinct populations. Dating analysis placed the skeletal remains at approximately 8,200 years old, nearly 3,000 years before Ötzi. This suggested that the hybridization process had been occurring for millennia before Ötzi's time. Additional evidence came from a re-examination of Alpine rock art dating from 10,000 to 4,000 years ago. Several sites in Switzerland and northern Italy contained depictions of what appeared to be two distinct types of humanoid figures, one with standard human proportions and another with noticeably different physical characteristics, including enlarged cranial regions, unusual limb proportions, and what seemed to be specialized clothing or body coverings. These artistic representations had previously been interpreted as shamanic figures or supernatural beings, explains Dr. Camilla Rossi, an expert in prehistoric European art from the University of Milan. But viewed through the lens of this new discovery, they could be literal depictions of two coexisting hominin species. Perhaps most compelling was the reassessment of Alpine folklore and mythology. Throughout the region, traditional stories speak of mountain people or ice folk, beings described as physically different from humans but capable of communication and occasional friendly relations. These legends, long dismissed as typical fairy tales or moral fables, took on new significance as potential cultural memories of actual encounters with a non-human hominin species. As archaeological evidence accumulated, geneticists worked to determine when this mysterious hominin species first diverged from the human lineage. By analyzing mutation rates and genetic divergence patterns, they estimated that the split occurred approximately 1.2 million years ago, well after humans and Neanderthals diverged, approximately 800,000 years ago, but before modern humans evolved in Africa, approximately 300,000 years ago. This places them in a completely unexpected position on the human family tree, explains Dr. Zimmerman. They're neither direct ancestors of Homo sapiens nor closely related to Neanderthals or Denisovans. They represent an entirely separate branch of human evolution that somehow survived in isolation until remarkably recent times. But if this species existed for over 1 million years and survived until the Copper Age, why have we never found clear fossil evidence of them before? The answer, researchers believe, lies in their specialized adaptation to high-altitude alpine environments. We're dealing with a species that appears to have been exquisitely adapted to one of the most inaccessible and inhospitable environments in Europe, says Dr. Peterson. The same factors that made high alpine regions difficult for humans to access and settle, extreme cold, rugged terrain, seasonal inaccessibility, would have provided this species with natural protection from competition and conflict. Furthermore, the alpine environment is particularly unsuited for fossil preservation. The combination of acidic soils, glacial movement, and extreme freeze-thaw cycles tends to destroy organic material rather than preserve it. The few remains that have survived, like Ötzi himself, did so only because of extraordinary circumstances, in his case, rapid freezing and encasement in protective ice. The high-altitude specialization theory gained further support from genetic analysis of the unknown DNA sequences. Many of the genes showed adaptations similar to those found in modern Tibetan populations, who have evolved specific genetic mechanisms for surviving at extreme altitudes, but the alpine hominin adaptations appeared more extensive and specialized. The genetic evidence suggests this species possessed a suite of adaptations for high-altitude survival far more developed than anything we see in modern humans, explains Dr. Antonelli. Their bodies would have been extraordinarily efficient at oxygen utilization, heat retention, and UV protection, all critical adaptations for permanent life above the tree line. This specialized adaptation may also explain why the species ultimately disappeared. As the Copper Age progressed into the Bronze Age, human technological development accelerated rapidly. Improved clothing, tools, weapons, and agricultural practices would have allowed humans to expand into previously inaccessible territories, including the high alpine regions that had served as the last refuge for this mysterious hominin species. What we're seeing is likely the final chapter of a very long story, suggests Dr. Berger. A highly specialized species that had successfully occupied a challenging ecological niche for hundreds of thousands of years, finally facing competition from a more generalized but technologically advanced species, Homo sapiens. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and sobering. Ötzi the Iceman lived during the Twilight period when the last members of this unknown hominin species were disappearing from Europe, occasionally interbreeding with human populations before fading into extinction, and eventually into myth. But the most provocative question remained unanswered. What did they look like? How did they behave? And how did Ötzi, with his hybrid genome, fit into the complex social dynamics between these two intelligent species? To understand Ötzi's world, researchers needed to reconstruct the physical appearance and likely behavior of the unknown hominin species. This required a multidisciplinary approach combining genetic analysis, comparative anatomy, archaeological evidence, and evolutionary biology. Dr. Laila Abramson, a paleoanthropologist from University College London, led the effort to develop a physical reconstruction based on the limited skeletal remains and genetic information available. Working with forensic artists and anatomists, she created a model of what a full-blooded member of this species might have looked like. The skeletal proportions indicate a body well adapted to cold, high-altitude environments, Abramson explains. Following Bergman's and Allen's rules of bioenergetics, we would expect a stocky torso with relatively short limbs to conserve heat. The pelvis fragments suggest a build even more compact than Neanderthals, who were already cold-adapted. The cranial fragments revealed other distinctive features. A slightly larger brain case than modern humans, with particularly developed occipital and parietal regions, areas associated with visual processing and sensory integration. The facial structure, reconstructed through computer modeling, suggested pronounced brow ridges and a shorter, broader nose, adaptations that would help warm and humidify cold, thin mountain air before it reached the lungs. If you passed one of these individuals on a city street today, wearing modern clothing, you would definitely notice something unusual about them, Abramson suggests. They would appear distinctly non-human, but not in a dramatic way, more like someone with an unusual combination of features that didn't quite fit any known ethnic pattern. The genetic analysis provided additional insights into their likely appearance and physiology. Genes associated with skin, hair, and eye pigmentation suggested light skin, an adaptation for maximum vitamin D production in low UV environments, combined with dark hair and eyes, which would provide protection during periods of high UV exposure on snow-covered alpine slopes. Perhaps most intriguingly, several genes associated with the larynx and vocal tract indicated anatomical differences that would have affected speech production. These individuals could likely produce and comprehend complex vocalizations, but their speech would have sounded noticeably different from human speech. They almost certainly had language, explains Dr. Nathan Reynolds, a linguistic anthropologist consulted on the project. The genetic markers for FOXP2 and other language-related genes show evidence of selection for communication. However, the structure of their vocal apparatus suggests they would have had difficulty with certain phonemes common in human languages, particularly some vowel sounds and sibilants. This raises fascinating questions about communication between the two species. Archaeological evidence suggests periodic contact and exchange, which would have required some form of interspecies communication. But how did it work? Did they develop simplified trade languages? Did individuals who grew up in contact zones become bilingual? Or did they rely primarily on nonverbal communication? The genetic evidence from Ötzi himself provides some clues. Among the 3% of his genome derived from the unknown hominin, several genes are associated with neurological development and language processing. These genetic variants might have facilitated his ability to function across both human and non-human social contexts, a biological bridge between two intelligent species. Ötzi appears to have been a true hybrid in both the biological and cultural sense, suggests Dr. Peterson. His genetic makeup would have given him certain physical and cognitive traits intermediate between the two parent species, potentially allowing him to navigate both worlds. This hybrid status raises important questions about Ötzi's social position. Was he accepted by human communities? Did he identify primarily with his human ancestry, or did he maintain connections with the non-human hominin population? And how common were individuals like him in Copper Age Alpine societies? To address these questions, researchers turned to a detailed re-examination of Ötzi himself. Not just his genes, but everything we know about his life, death, and material culture. Ötzi's possessions had always been considered typical for a Copper Age human. Clothing made from animal skins, a copper axe, a flint dagger, a yew bow, and various other tools. But subtle anomalies had been noted from the beginning. His bow, for instance, was made from yew wood that had not been properly cured, rendering it functionally useless. Some researchers had previously suggested this indicated hasty craftsmanship by someone fleeing from enemies. In light of the new findings, Dr. Berger proposed an alternative interpretation. The mistakes in Ötzi's equipment may reflect cultural differences rather than poor craftsmanship. If he was raised in a community with different technological traditions, he might have been attempting to reproduce human tools without fully understanding the manufacturing processes. The most compelling evidence for Ötzi's hybrid cultural identity came from his famous tattoos. The 61 tattoos covering his body had previously been interpreted as therapeutic markings, as they corresponded to classical acupuncture points and areas of degenerative disease in his body. But when compared with the newly discovered rock art depicting the unknown hominin species, researchers noticed striking similarities in pattern and placement. The tattoos may represent a form of cultural expression associated with the non-human hominin population, suggests Dr. Rossi. They could indicate his connection to that heritage, perhaps serving both medical and identity functions. Even Ötzi's final days and death took on new meaning in light of his hybrid status. The evidence indicates he died from an arrow wound after consuming a final meal and climbing to a high elevation. He carried the personal possessions of several different individuals, suggesting he had been involved in some form of conflict. His body was found at an elevation of approximately 3,210 meters, 10,530 feet, an environment where pure-blooded humans would struggle, but where the unknown hominin species would have been comfortable. One interpretation is that Ötzi was fleeing from human communities toward the higher elevations where relatives from his non-human lineage might have lived, suggests Dr. Berger. The arrow in his back suggests he was being pursued, possibly by humans who viewed his hybrid status with suspicion or fear. This scenario aligns with broader archaeological evidence suggesting increasing conflict during this period. The Copper Age represented a time of significant technological and social change in European society. Agriculture was intensifying, populations were growing, and competition for resources was increasing. In such contexts, individuals who differed from the norm, like Ötzi, might have faced heightened suspicion or outright hostility. We may be witnessing the final stages of a much longer process of replacement, suggests Dr. Peterson. As human populations expanded and developed more sophisticated technologies, they would have gradually encroached on territories previously occupied by this other hominin species. Individuals with mixed ancestry might have found themselves caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. This interpretation casts Ötzi not just as a fascinating scientific specimen, but as a poignant symbol of a lost chapter in human history, a time when our species shared the European landscape with another intelligent hominin, occasionally interbreeding but ultimately replacing them entirely. The story of Ötzi and the unknown Alpine hominins forces us to reconsider our understanding of recent human prehistory. The conventional narrative portrays anatomically modern humans emerging from Africa, gradually replacing all other hominin species, and then developing civilization in relative isolation. The new evidence suggests a more complex reality. Modern humans coexisted and occasionally interbred with multiple hominin species well into the period we consider historical, rather than evolutionary time. As Dr. Zimmerman observes, we've been thinking about human evolution as something that happened in the distant past, tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. But Ötzi shows us that the story of human origins was still being written much more recently than we ever imagined. The discovery of Ötzi's hybrid genome and the evidence for a previously unknown hominin species in Europe has implications far beyond our understanding of Alpine prehistory. It challenges fundamental assumptions about human uniqueness, forces a reconsideration of historical and archaeological evidence worldwide, and raises profound questions about how we define humanity itself. One of the most immediate scientific impacts has been a wholesale re-examination of anomalous archaeological findings from around the world. Sites and artifacts that didn't quite fit established narratives of human development are being reassessed with new eyes, considering the possibility that they might represent evidence of other unknown hominin species or hybridization events. Dr. Isabella Martinez, an archaeologist specializing in European Neolithic cultures, has been coordinating a database of such findings. We've identified over 300 archaeological sites across Europe with elements that have never been satisfactorily explained within conventional frameworks, she explains. These range from unusual burial practices to atypical tool designs to skeletal remains with unexplained anatomical features. One particularly intriguing case involves a series of cave systems in the Cantabrian Mountains of northern Spain. Excavations in the 1970s uncovered evidence of habitation dating to approximately 7000 BCE, well into the Neolithic period, but the material culture found there didn't match known human settlements from that era. The stone tools showed technological approaches more typical of much earlier periods, yet the dating was confirmed through multiple methods. At the time, researchers assumed they had found an unusually conservative human population that maintained archaic traditions, Martinez notes. But now we have to consider whether these might represent settlements of another hominin species that coexisted with Neolithic humans in the Iberian Peninsula. Similar reassessments are occurring worldwide. In the Philippines, the 2019 discovery of Homo luzonensis, dated to approximately 50,000 to 67,000 years ago, had already demonstrated that multiple hominin species coexisted into relatively recent times. The Ötzi findings suggest we should extend this possibility much further into the historical period. We've been working with a fundamentally flawed assumption, explains Dr. Zimmerman. We assumed that by the time agriculture developed, modern humans were the only hominin species left on Earth. That assumption has colored every interpretation of archaeological evidence from that period. We need to revisit everything with fresh eyes. This reassessment extends to the realm of historical records and folklore. Dr. Michael Thornton, a historical anthropologist specializing in European folk traditions, has been cataloging accounts from classical and medieval sources that describe encounters with non-human but intelligent beings. Historical texts from ancient Greece, Rome, and medieval Europe contain numerous references to wild people, forest dwellers, or mountain men, Thornton explains. These were typically dismissed as myth or misidentifications of great apes. But many of these accounts include details that align remarkably well with what we're now learning about this Alpine hominin species. Descriptions of beings that could use tools, communicate through sounds different from human language, and survive in environments humans found challenging. Perhaps most significantly, the The revelation that another intelligent species coexisted with humans until historically recent times forces us to reconsider our conception of human uniqueness. For decades, paleoanthropologists have emphasized the exceptional nature of Homo sapiens, our capacity for symbolic thought, complex language, technological innovation, and social cooperation. The discovery that another equally intelligent but fundamentally different hominin species survived alongside us until just 5,000 years ago challenges this narrative of human exceptionalism. It suggests that the cognitive and cultural capacities we consider uniquely human may in fact be shared features of multiple hominin lineages, that intelligence and culture evolved multiple times in parallel among closely related but distinct species. We need to reconceptualize human evolution not as a single linear progression leading inevitably to Homo sapiens, but as a bush with multiple branches, each representing a successful adaptation to particular environmental and social niches, suggests Dr. Antonelli. Our species wasn't inevitably destined for dominance. We may simply have possessed a more generalist adaptive strategy that proved advantageous as environments changed, while other hominin species with more specialized adaptations eventually lost their ecological niches. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand our place in nature and our relationship to other species. If multiple intelligent hominin species once shared the planet, and one survived alongside us until the dawn of recorded history, then perhaps intelligence and culture are not the rare cosmic accidents we've assumed them to be. Perhaps they are more common evolutionary outcomes than we've recognized. The Ötzi discovery also raises difficult ethical questions about how we study and display ancient remains. If Ötzi was indeed a hybrid individual caught between two worlds, does that change our responsibilities regarding his remains? Should he be viewed as a unique individual deserving of special consideration, rather than simply as a scientific specimen? Dr. Peterson, who oversees Ötzi's preservation and display at the South Tyrol Museum, has been wrestling with these questions. We've always treated Ötzi with scientific respect, she says, but knowing that he represents not just an ancient human, but potentially one of the last individuals with substantial genetic heritage from an extinct hominin species, that adds another dimension to our ethical obligations. The museum has begun consulting with ethicists and indigenous rights advocates about appropriate protocols for displaying and studying Ötzi's remains. While there are no direct descendants of the unknown hominin species to consult, the principle of treating ancient remains with dignity and respect still applies. Perhaps the most profound implication of the Ötzi discovery concerns our understanding of what it means to be human. Throughout history, humans have drawn sharp distinctions between ourselves and other species. We have defined our humanity in opposition to nature as something exceptional, separate, and unique. But if our species regularly interbred with other intelligent hominins, producing fertile offspring like Ötzi who could function in both worlds, then the boundary between human and other becomes much more blurred. Humanity appears not as a discrete category but as a spectrum of related forms, all intelligent, all cultural, all capable of symbolic thought and technological innovation. In a very real sense, we need to rethink the concept of human, suggests Dr. Zimmerman. If individuals like Ötzi could exist, biological hybrids carrying the genetic heritage of two distinct intelligent species, then our definition of humanity cannot be based on sharp taxonomic boundaries. We may need to consider cognition, cultural capacity, and moral awareness as more relevant criteria than strict genetic lineage. This perspective invites us to see ourselves not as the inevitable pinnacle of evolution, but as one branch of a complex family tree of intelligent beings, most now extinct, but some potentially surviving long enough to influence our cultural memory and perhaps even our genetic makeup. When we look at Ötzi, reflects Dr. Peterson, we're not just seeing an ancient human ancestor, we're seeing tangible evidence of a lost world, a world where our species shared the planet with other minds, other perspectives, other ways of being intelligent. Understanding that world may help us better understand our own. As the scientific community continues to process the implications of Ötzi's hybrid genome and the evidence for an unknown hominin species in Europe, researchers are already pursuing new avenues of investigation. The discovery has opened up questions that may take decades to fully explore. One of the most active areas of research involves searching for additional genetic traces of this unknown species in modern human populations. Dr. Benjamin Zhao's initial finding that approximately 8% of individuals in isolated alpine communities carry small amounts of this genetic material has sparked a much broader investigation. We're now analyzing genetic data from populations across Europe, looking for these distinctive markers, Zhao explains. Preliminary results suggest the genetic footprint extends beyond the Alps, with traces appearing in populations from the Pyrenees, the Carpathians, and even as far as the Caucasus Mountains. This geographic distribution suggests that the unknown hominin species may have occupied a much larger range than initially thought, possibly inhabiting mountainous regions across much of Europe and Western Asia. These high-elevation environments would have provided both the selective pressures that drove their specialized adaptations and the isolation that allowed them to survive alongside expanding human populations. The genetic analysis has also revealed something unexpected. The proportion of this unknown hominin DNA in European populations appears to have declined significantly over the past 5,000 years, with the steepest drop occurring during the Bronze Age, approximately 3000 to 1000 BCE. This timing correlates with major technological and social changes in European society, explains Dr. Antonelli. The Bronze Age brought metallurgy, more complex social hierarchies, larger settlements, and increased warfare. These developments would have intensified pressure on any remaining non-human hominin populations and likely reduced the social acceptance of hybrid individuals. Indeed, the archaeological record from this period shows evidence of increasing standardization in material culture and burial practices, suggesting stronger enforcement of social norms and potentially less tolerance for individuals who differed from those norms. Historical linguists have joined the investigation, examining ancient European languages for potential evidence of contact with a non-human linguistic tradition. Dr. Helena Morris, a specialist in Proto-Indo-European languages, has identified several terms in ancient European vocabularies that don't follow expected etymological patterns. There are words in early Indo-European languages, particularly those related to alpine environments, herbal knowledge, and certain technological processes, that have no clear linguistic roots, Morris explains. These terms may represent lexical borrowings from the language of this unknown hominin species, conceptual technologies that were adopted along with the words used to describe them. This linguistic evidence aligns with archaeological findings suggesting that the relationship between humans and the unknown hominin species wasn't solely characterized by conflict. There appear to have been periods of cooperation, trade, and cultural exchange. We're seeing evidence of a complex relationship that varied over time and across regions, notes Dr. Berger. In some areas, archaeological evidence suggests peaceful coexistence and cultural exchange. In others, we find signs of conflict and competition. The full picture was likely as complicated as any intergroup relationship throughout human history. As researchers continue to investigate these questions, a new field of study is emerging at the intersection of archaeology, genetics, linguistics, and anthropology. One focused specifically on understanding the interactions between Homo sapiens and other hominin species during the Holocene, the current geological epoch, beginning approximately 11,700 years ago. This emerging field has been termed Recent Hominin Interaction Studies, or RHIS. Unlike traditional paleoanthropology, which focuses on much older periods of human evolution, RHIS examines the final chapters of our shared history with other intelligent species, the periods of contact, conflict, cooperation, and ultimately incorporation through interbreeding. We're essentially studying the last act in a very long evolutionary drama, explains Dr. Peterson. For millions of years, multiple hominin species evolved in parallel, occasionally interacting and interbreeding. We're now focusing on the final moments of that shared history, the point at which our species became the only surviving member of our evolutionary family. This perspective invites us to see Ötzi not merely as an individual from the past, but as a representative of a critical transition point in our species' history. He lived during the twilight period when the human story was shifting from one of coexistence with other intelligent species to our current reality as the lone surviving hominin. What does this mean for our understanding of ourselves? Dr. Zimmerman suggests that it should inspire both humility and a sense of responsibility. For most of our evolutionary history, we shared this planet with other thinking, feeling beings who were both like and unlike ourselves, he reflects. Our current solitude as the only surviving hominin species is a recent and perhaps temporary condition. It should remind us that our dominance isn't the inevitable result of superiority, but the outcome of a complex evolutionary history shaped by chance as much as by adaptation. This humility extends to how we interpret our own accomplishments. Many of the genetic and cultural adaptations we pride ourselves on, from high-altitude adaptations to traditional ecological knowledge, may in fact represent a complex legacy inherited not just from our direct human ancestors but from other hominin species through both genetic exchange and cultural learning. When we look at traditional Alpine cultures, their distinctive architecture, their specialized approaches to high-altitude agriculture, their unique medicinal traditions, we may be seeing the echoes of knowledge originally developed by this other hominin species and transferred to human communities through thousands of years of contact, suggests Dr. Peterson. This perspective transforms how we understand human cultural evolution. Rather than seeing culture as a uniquely human achievement, we might more accurately view it as the product of a complex network of intelligent species sharing innovations, competing for resources, and occasionally combining their genetic and cultural heritage through interbreeding and exchange. In this light, Ötzi represents something profound, a living embodiment of the complex biological and cultural exchanges that characterized our species' relationship with our closest evolutionary relatives. His hybrid genome and the material culture he carried with him tell a story not of human exceptionalism, but of interconnection, a story in which the boundaries between us and them were fluid and permeable. As we continue to study Ötzi and search for additional evidence of this unknown hominin species, we may be forced to reconsider not just the details of European prehistory, but our fundamental narrative of what it means to be human in a world we once shared with other minds. In the climate-controlled chamber of the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology, Ötzi's mummified body lies in state, viewed by thousands of visitors each year. Most still see him as he was understood before, a window into ancient human life, a remarkably preserved specimen of early European humanity. Few yet recognize the profound revelation his body now represents. Evidence that we are not as alone in the universe of mind as we have believed. For decades, we've searched the cosmos for signs of other intelligence, pointing radio telescopes at distant stars, analyzing atmospheric compositions of exoplanets, listening for signals amid the cosmic static. Yet all along, evidence of another intelligence existed right here on Earth, preserved in alpine ice and hiding within our own genomes. The unknown hominin species that contributed to Ötzi's genetic makeup, this intelligent population adapted to high alpine environments, capable of complex thought and cultural transmission, able to interbreed with humans yet distinctly non-human in their evolutionary history, represents perhaps the most profound discovery about ourselves since we first recognized our kinship with other primates. They were not us, yet they were enough like us to share genes, ideas, and perhaps even emotions and experiences. They represent a unique experiment in hominin evolution, a path of adaptation and cognitive development that paralleled our own but followed a different trajectory. And in Ötzi's hybrid body, we see evidence that these parallel paths occasionally converged. When I look at Ötzi now, reflects Dr. Meredith Peterson, I see someone who literally embodied the meeting of two worlds, two intelligent species whose evolutionary paths diverged over 1 million years earlier but remained similar enough to produce viable offspring. He navigated cultural and biological spaces that spanned the human and non-human. He carried in his cells and perhaps in his consciousness the heritage of two distinct evolutionary experiments in intelligence. This perspective transforms Ötzi from a curiosity of ancient human history into something far more significant, a biological bridge between two thinking worlds, a living embodiment of the complex relationships that characterized our species' early history. The implications extend far beyond archaeology and genetics. If another intelligent species survived alongside humans until just 5,300 years ago, well after we had developed agriculture, metallurgy, writing, and complex social institutions, then intelligence may be a more common evolutionary outcome than we've assumed. Our cosmic solitude may be the exception rather than the rule. Furthermore, the evidence that humans and this unknown hominin species interbred successfully for thousands of years suggests that recognizably different forms of intelligence can find common ground, can communicate, cooperate, and even form intimate bonds across species boundaries. This offers a hopeful perspective for potential future encounters with other intelligences, whether they emerge from our own technological creations or from the stars. Perhaps most profoundly, the Ötzi discovery reminds us that our current status as the only hominin species on Earth is a historical anomaly. For most of our evolutionary history, we shared the planet with other thinking beings. Other eyes looking out at the same stars, other minds making sense of the same world, other hands shaping tools from the same materials. We've been alone for such a short time in evolutionary terms, notes Dr. Zimmerman. For hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps even millions, multiple intelligent hominin species coexisted on this planet. Our current solitude is the exception, not the rule. And it's worth asking what we lost when we lost our evolutionary cousins. What perspectives, what adaptations, what ways of being in the world disappeared when they disappeared. In Ötzi, we glimpse a world where those different perspectives could sometimes merge, where the genetic and cultural heritage of distinct intelligent species could combine in a single individual. His hybrid genome represents not just an interesting scientific curiosity but a profound metaphor for the complex interconnections that have always characterized our relationship with other thinking beings. As we continue to study Ötzi and search for additional evidence of the unknown hominin species that contributed to his genetic makeup, we may need to reimagine human history not as the story of a single species pursuing its destiny in isolation, but as one thread in a complex tapestry of intelligent life forms, some now extinct, others perhaps still undiscovered, all part of the same evolutionary story. In this light, Ötzi's legacy takes on new significance. He stands as a reminder that the boundaries between human and other have always been more permeable than we've acknowledged, that our history, our genes, and perhaps even our consciousness have been shaped by interactions with other forms of intelligence that shared our world. The mummified man from the ice, with his hybrid genome and the story it tells, offers us a profound truth. We have never been as alone as we thought, and the story of human uniqueness is more complex, more interconnected, and perhaps more hopeful than we ever imagined.